You're listening to the Rogue Ones podcast, conversations with extraordinary people doing fascinating things. The Rogues featured on today's episode are the brains and the heart behind some iconic pieces of music. Perhaps this sounds familiar. And how about this track, one of my favorites, from the band DC Talk? Or what about this one? Keep listening, my friends. I'm Leslie Eiler Thompson, host and curator of this limited podcast series. The format of today's episode is new. I'll be talking to two Rogue Ones at once. They're a team. One has lived most of their life in the public eye. The other has been by his side the entire time, supporting the mission and purpose behind the public acclaim. Charlie Ashworth, known professionally as producer, composer, arranger, mastermind, Charlie Peacock, has worked in music and with artists most of his life, guiding, forming, and creating music into work that sets trends for the next generation of music makers. Standing beside him for over 44 years is his wife, Andi Ashworth, who is a caregiver and published author. Together, the Ashworths built a compound-esque recording studio and gathering space on the outskirts of Nashville that also acted as their home and a housing facility for the artists who came to record there. Art House Nashville, it's called. And while Charlie was recording classics with legendary musicians, Andi was making the machine function. She fed, housed, loved, and served these creators in order to ready them for their best work. She also hosted those who came to events in the space, and it's not an exaggeration to say there were thousands that came through Art House Nashville in their time at the helm. All this was done while they raised their young family on the grounds, and eventually, grandchildren. This is perhaps what the Ashworths are best known for, but their long marriage is made up of more than that. Having met as teenagers, Charlie and Andi's life together has been one of extraordinary measures, but not without struggle. In recent years, health concerns and chapter rewriting have been part of their narrative, and yet they remain willfully and joyfully bound to each other and their faith in God. The Ashworths have recently started a new blog together called The Writer, the Husband. Each new release features 2 entries, one per spouse. While Charlie's creative life has often been taking place in the public's presence, Andi's writing has been given a new space to shine through this project. Charlie and Andi welcomed me and my audio team into their home, where she had prepared snacks and coffee for our meeting. She gave us hugs and made us feel at home. We talked in their living room, with each Ashworth taking a leather chair. It's a conversation about faith transforming the life of a rogue, and their lessons resonated so deeply with me. This is a conversation about fruitfulness, vocation, hospitality, and building community, things that have yet to be discussed on this podcast series. So now, it's my honor to introduce you to Charlie and Andi Ashworth. So you two have a legacy of building a rich artistic community through your establishment of Art House, and in your work producing some of the leading artists of our time. Charlie, you have been called one of the most prolific cultural influencers to come out of Nashville, which is just a very big phrase. And Andi, you've been with him every step of the way, right beside him, establishing things with him, doing things with him. But it all started your freshman year, I think. You said when you were at
freshman year of high school,
was it
yeah.
band camp? How did that?
Band practice.
Marching band practice.
Yes, the hot summer right before we went into our freshman year.
That's when we met. We weren't boyfriend and girlfriend until the next summer.
And what was your first date?
Well, I always think of our first date as the turtle time, right? I mean, that was really our first date. We had spent a big part of the summer talking on the phone, seeing each other a little bit, but kind of right before school was getting ready to go back in session, we met at, what was the name of the park? Oh, Sam Brannan
Park.
Yeah, Sam Brannan
our
Park
bikes,
in Yuba City,
of course,
California.
yes.
and I was working a summer job for a department store called W.T. Grant's, which had a pet center in it. So I got a turtle from there and brought the turtle to the date, and that was my gift to her. It was a little turtle in one of those, looks like a Chinese food box.
So, Andy, what did you name this turtle?
The turtle was named Percy, and I brought it home and I put it in a fish aquarium. No fish, but just an aquarium. And the turtle grew from a little tiny. Some of you listeners will be too young to know when dime stores sold little tiny turtles.
Yeah, but there
But
was
anyway,
quite a.
Oh, so this was a small
Oh
turtle.
yeah,
yeah,
little
small
tiny turtle.
one. They used
Okay.
to sell them.
That wasn't what I had
I
in my
mean,
head.
And it
when we were kids
grew.
growing up, they were just every place sold them.
Oh,
Yes,
that was
and
a
it
thing.
grew to the size of how
Yeah,
big?
it grew to a normal sized turtle.
It grew to fit the aquarium, and then in another summer, probably the next summer, he invited me over to bring the turtle to go swimming in a little pond he'd made in the backyard. With
Not
his,
us
with his
swimming.
no, with the little turtle swimming
Oh,
with
okay.
his
So
sisters.
not all three of you,
with his
including the
sister's
Like, wow,
turtle,
he
and
was
then
a-
Percy wandered off, and
Oh, no, he
enterprising.
we
ran
never
away?
saw him again.
Never did see old
He
Percy
ran away.
again.
I'm glad you guys made it past that.
Mhm,
You know, a lot of
I
people
know.
probably would have thought, well, it's all over now that the turtle. Some people might have taken that as a sign. I'm glad you didn't.
It's true.
So where did
Yeah.
you go from there? Because you've been married now 44 years, is that right?
This May. Mm-hmm.
Okay, congratulations.
Thank you.
How old were you when you got married then?
He was 18, I was 19.
What did your
so
parents think?
I think they knew it was going to happen.
Okay.
We had been
By that time, we'd worn them down, I
inseparable
think.
through
Yeah.
high school.
Yeah, we were very inseparable and very much comfort to each other in the midst of family situations at that time that just weren't ideal at all. You know, I don't think we would ever say this back then, but basically it was like, I trust you, you trust me. We can't really trust a lot of these other things, but let's bind together and trust together. You know, and the sad part about it is it really is in the overarching analysis, it's children thinking they have to become adults,
Mm.
you know, and we've made it to year 44. It hasn't been without its cost because of the way we began.
Mm.
You know, and it's just wasn't a neutral choice. I think at that time we would have thought it was, you know, that there wasn't, you know, we were young and dumb and didn't think there were any consequences for anything.
Sure. Has this lifestyle of writing, making music, all these things, is this already well established in your youth? Like some people kind of have always been led by that. What did that look like when you got to that part of your life?
Music was definitely in his blood and already happening in his life. Writing for me had just been, it was not well established for me. English teachers in the 70s, at least where we're from, they didn't require a lot of us in terms of great literature, but we had an English teacher who assigned us all journaling, and that was really significant for me. I kind of grew from that into my adulthood, wanting to archive, just having this really strong urge to write life down.
Mm.
And I also was a big reader
Mm.
always. And so those two things were in me, but they grew and developed.
Well, you said in your blog, and I have it written down here, had I known what to look for in those days, I might have seen tiny seeds of my future life present in my childhood. Like all young people, there were clues to the complexity of my gifts and desires. That kind of insight only comes when you look backward to find the threads that were there all along.
Mm-hmm.
So were those sorts of the threads that you look back and you see
I do.
making this tapestry?
Yes, I do. And I just see them. They're very immature, they're very undeveloped, but it's the little pieces, the little breadcrumbs along the way. So those things were in place in a very undeveloped form for me at that time.
Yeah, I agree with Andy. those threads were there, and really our whole life has just been the outworking of them and watching them come to fruition, and then of course not an even trajectory. I mean, there's all sorts of ups and downs in the midst of that. But for me, creatively, what I do today is what I did when I was a little kid.
Hmm. How do you describe that? How do you,
I mean,
when you boil it
because I
down?
was raised by a musician and the music was always in me. I was always someone who could extemporaneously create music.
Hmm.
And I loved art, and I used to draw a lot. And when I started getting some affirmation for my ability to write, then that seemed like, yeah, that's something I
Hmm.
like to do too. I mean, even to the point of probably when we first got married, um, I probably at that time would have said, I want to be a writer.
Mm-hmm.
A songwriter,
No,
specific.
no,
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 oh, a
You
no,
want to
a
be
writer.
a
Like,
writer. Like I want
novelist.
to be a
Mm-hmm.
novelist
oh,
and
you
a
did.
And a
and a
poet.
poet. But you
Mm-hmm.
tell your parents that you want to be a poet.
Oh boy.
That's a little lower than a musician even. But
At least they
that,
can see musicians making money
yeah,
on TV
yeah.
or
But
somewhere.
I
Yeah.
did, yeah. I mean, I even tried to sell poetry
Did you
at a
really?
crafts fair. But anyway, the point being that those things, like Andy said, that were there for her in the beginning, I had my own set of those,
Mhm.
and we have, looking back, now we can see the hand of family and of circumstance and of in our estimation, of God shaping us and forming us for a life that we couldn't yet describe.
I am sure that these are numerous and probably too many to count and recall sitting right here. But what are some of early on? What were some of the biggest hands of your family and of what were some of the biggest things that led you, kind of catapulted you to the next thing and to the next thing?
Really, our story is that we grew up in a place which I think both would tell you that we perceived it as a place you leave.
Mm. That's a
And
distinction, not a
yeah,
place that you
yeah,
stay,
yeah,
a
but
place
a
that you.
place that you leave. That whatever was going to happen in our life together, it wasn't going to happen there.
Hmm.
During that time, if you say between 18 and 28 or so, that most of my efforts were put into music and developing as a musician, and kind of incrementally achieving the things necessary that during my time coming up musicians had to achieve in order to go to the next sort of circle of affirmation or the
Mm.
next place of success or achievement in order to be invited to the next place.
What were
And
some of
so,
those things? Do you are
well,
they?
it's very tied to your community. I mean, you have to be affirmed. If you're a little kid, you're affirmed by your parents and your neighbors, and then by your school, by your community, by bands that you're in. And then you go out from that. You say, okay, well, I've done this in my little hometown. Now I got to go down the road 50 miles and see if I can
Mm.
do it there. Right.
Mm.
So while I was sort of learning how to succeed at the music game, I think you were really going back to school.
And I
Is that
was
right?
actually really becoming interested in learning,
Mm-hmm.
which I hadn't been so much that in high school. Was really just trying to survive in those days. So became interested and found in my college classes, oh, I'm actually good at this. I'm actually a good student, and I'm surprised by that because I didn't know. And
I mean, a good way to perceive it is that, we're 18 and 19 years old, and a time when most 18, 19-year-olds are going away to college, right? Well, we gave it kind of a little bit of an attempt, and then it
Uh-huh.
was really too difficult. I
Mm-hmm.
mean,
well, because we were also
we had
needing to pay the
we
rent and
had
Right.
have
to
little jobs to
yeah,
help
yeah,
us pay the
and we
rent.
didn't
And
have any other means to do it. So it was really more about that. So to come back around at it like Andy did, and I did to some extent, was just that longing, I think. Like, we don't want to miss out on this. We do want to learn, and we don't want to sort of have the fact that we got married so young kind of penalize us and keep us out of the game.
I would take classes and then we start having children.
Okay.
So by the time I'm 21, we have our first baby.
Mm-hmm.
I would major in something different every time I went back. Women's studies, when that was brand new.
Okay.
It was just a brand new thing. Gerontology was another thing because I had always been drawn to older people and older people's lives since I was a little girl. Social work was another thing. So I was always just trying to find
Always
what
people.
are
I
the
think
things inside
people
of
are
me.
all of the
Yeah.
the central surrounding things there.
Yes.
What was it that made you interested in old people? I'm curious.
When I was about 10 years old, I went to visit my dad in Oregon. I lived in California. My parents had been divorced since I was 4.5. And I went with my stepsister to, just for the day, she was a nurse's aide at a convalescent hospital. And while she was working, I just went around with her and I visited with people. I struck up a friendship with a man named Matt. And when I came home back to California, I kept writing to him. And I can't remember if he wrote to me, but I wrote to him. And that's where I remembered that was the first time I felt like this being with people who are lonely in that kind of setting, that means something to me. And it kind of built the older I got. And when we were in California, still, we had a time in our life where, so we'd had a difficult few first years of marriage, went through a lot of things, had 2 small children, and then we both kind of one after another became Christians. And
it's a real spiritual awakening.
Yeah, very big spiritual awakening that really affected kind of the whole of our life.
Did you grow up with families that were?
My grandmother.
Yeah.
Well, both sets of grandparents.
But in a quiet way,
Yeah, different
not a sort of extrovert or explicit way, but definitely lived out what it meant to follow Jesus. I mean, I would say that about particularly about my grandmothers, for sure. You'd probably say that too.
Mine too.
Yeah.
So we both had such a gratitude at that point that, and so when we first started going to our first little church, and they needed somebody to host the community to come and study the Bible, or they needed, we just like, we have a lot of shag carpeting. We don't have very much furniture, but we'll do it because we were just so grateful to be together, to be together as a family, to have a little house that we rented and be together in it. So it started out of gratitude. And then as we went on through those years, Chuck began to travel a lot or be in the studio a lot. So he'd bring people home for dinner, or he'd travel around the world and and invite them, if you're ever in town, come be with us. So there was this progression of hospitality, and
yes, it was set then.
learning it, and also
thrust into it a bit,
kind of thrust into it, but also in inviting it, also good with it, happy with it, and so all of that is kind of snowballing. And then we moved to Nashville.
Okay. We'll get back to Charlie and Andy sharing about the beginnings of Art House Nashville. They'll talk about the importance of building and caring for a place, and not only that, but caring for those who enter that place. This idea of place is so important as we continue on our journeys. On a previous episode, Rogue Number 8, Brandon Hayes, shares about the author and poet Wendell Berry. Berry created a fictional world based in the late 1800s, early 1900s Kentucky, with a membership of farmers and land keepers called Port William. The members of Port William are devoted to their land and care for it. Berry's books, poems, and short stories cling to the importance of place. keeping the ground we live on, laboring where we are with what we have. I'm reminded of this as I listen to the Ashworths talk about their art house community. This and more coming up. Stay tuned. If you've just joined us on the Rogue Ones podcast, I'm so grateful to have you here. Keep your podcast app playing after this episode to meet more rogues handpicked for those of us looking to live extraordinary and remarkable lives. Sometimes it'll feel like a business podcast, and sometimes it'll feel like a human interest storytelling show. The truth is, it's both. Rogues across the country listen to this podcast to get inspiration for wherever they are, and I'm honored to have you listening today. Find all episodes, past and present, at rogueonespodcast.com. Now, let's get back to Charlie and Andi, where we talk about Art House Nashville, and after, their transition to their life after Art House as they start writing, literally, a new chapter.
And almost the minute we moved to Nashville, Chuck is really, again, he's traveling, he's touring,
Yeah.
or he's in the studio, and he's inviting.
Yeah.
So then we started, and then because we lived in Nashville, a lot of people that we already knew wanted to come.
Wanted to come and live here.
And, come through town and stay with us. So it just became bigger and bigger and bigger.
Uh-huh.
But all the while, I'm finding, just beginning to learn there are things about this that I really love and I'm really good at. I wouldn't have thought about it like that then.
Mm-hmm.
But I also get really exhausted when we're at the table for 3 hours and Chuck's gone back to wherever he's gone and I'm alone with people. And so it begins to be, we're learning the good, happy, beautiful parts and the hard
And
parts.
the cost of it.
The messy parts.
Yeah, and the cost of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then we move into the art house, and then it becomes really a way of life.
And this house was a former church turned house by the owners before you.
Yes.
It was a Methodist church.
Kind of classic, small New England style, one-room church. When we moved into it, it was more than that, and then we added onto it significantly. But that's what it was in 1912. When we moved to Nashville, that was our first interaction with the business of Christian music or gospel music. And I quickly picked up on that people thought they were making a genre of music. And that really confused me. I thought, that's just crazy talk.
Why?
Genre always wants to narrow and define. And that's its ideology. If genre has an ideology, that's its overriding concern, to conform. My understanding of music and what it meant to follow Jesus is that music, if there were Christian music, that music would do a multitude of things. It would serve the church all over the world, across generations. And then I knew enough about music that not everyone would be called to serve the church through music. So there would be all of these other musicians who profess to follow Jesus who would be called to different kinds of musical vocations. And just like the former, there would be 100 different ways to express that, in 100 different countries, over 100 different generations. And so the idea that Nashville or Waco or Chatsworth, California, or wherever it might be, had figured out how to make this thing called Christian music, it just seemed absurd to me. It's like a drop of water in an ocean of possibilities. That's all it is. The real music that is made by people of faith is an ocean of music. And for me, the overriding concern was to not conform.
I love that.
But to pray and find out what your calling and mission was. So we took those ideas and some complementary ideas to that, and shared them with a pastor at Christ Community Church who really understood what I was talking about, and befriended Andy and I both. And as a result of that, we ended up buying this old church and getting some young people who had just graduated from university, and they came and lived there and helped us get started with this work that we called Art House. In the early days, it had a lot of different kinds of expressions in Nashville. It could be everything from me just going to Belmont and being a guest speaker to having a prof from Vanderbilt teaching on Flannery O'Connor on Wednesday nights to a Bible study. And it just had a lot of different ways that expressed itself event-wise, but most significantly, it expressed itself just through the one-on-one communication with people, because we would have days where we didn't leave our property, right? But people were coming to us, particularly once the studio was built. So then we had, a large meeting place, we had offices, we had employees and
And we had
staff.
moved our family
Yeah,
in.
and our
Yeah, so your
family
house
moved
is
in.
actually
3
becoming
years later, after
Yeah, yeah.
purchasing
okay.
and starting to do the work there, we moved our family in.
Yeah.
So
And
it's
then
becoming a
made
bit
it
of
into
a-
our
We
home.
I don't
basically,
use the word compound, but it's
yes,
growing
no,
in
it
many
was.
people
No, that's
did use
exactly,
the
no,
word.
that's
Okay,
exactly
all
what,
right.
exactly what it was.
Yeah.
Because we had a freestanding studio someplace else. We had another house someplace else,
Okay.
and we had this. We basically took everything that we were doing and we put it under that one roof. And so it was there that I started a record company as well, and we kept that, under that same roof. I mean, there's just a crazy amount of activity for one family to withstand. And neither of us are extroverts. But Andy is a lot kinder than I am. So she would stay in it with people, for 3 hours when she was just, her introvert was just crying out, right? And I'd be like, hey, shut the lights off when you leave. In my defense, I would say it was part of the way that I developed the ability to deal with it. In truth, in retrospect, I was having a lot of problems with it too. But one of the ways for me to deal with it was for me to just sort of stand outside of it, and say, like, look, if this person is upset because I'm ready to go back to the studio or ready to go to bed or whatever it is, I can't control that.
Sure.
We've already done this unique thing and opening up our entire life to you. And if you're going to have trouble with me needing to go back to work or going to bed, then I guess we'll just have that trouble together.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I was willing to live with that, and that was a way of coping for me. But Andy had her own different ways of coping.
Yeah. How did you cope through those
Well,
times?
there were, so we ended up there were so many components to it, like we said, but in terms of just hospitality and guests, especially once our children were leaving the nest, we had renovated the entire house, or we had almost finished the renovation. We had more bedrooms than we had when we had kids at home. And they began to fill up more and more. So we had a really constant stream of house guests for many, many reasons. Some of them music business, artists who were working with Chuck, but also so many different kinds of reasons that when you look at it and you try to figure it out, I couldn't figure out any other reason than the hand of God is in this.
I mean, it's not an exaggeration. I mean, we had thousands of people.
Yeah,
come
so
to
we
our
had
home.
the gathering component,
Okay.
which
Yeah.
we'd open to the community and maybe have a speaker, have a musician open for a speaker. We'd have theologians, we'd have writers, we'd have authors. That was one component. We had studio guests, so people who were making records
Yeah.
in the studio. They might be staying with us or eating with us.
So, yeah.
There would be people coming to have meetings with either one of us. That all happened there. Sometimes there were a couple of times we did video shoots.
Yeah.
So I'm cooking for
Sales
all of these
sales
different people
conferences.
and things.
And because it was such a unique
Yeah.
place, people wanted to see it and come to it.
Right.
So it would be the kind of thing where if I was in a meeting with a record label and we were talking about launching a record, the first thing to come out of their mouth is, "Wouldn't it be cool if we could have a party at the art house?"
And
Right?
Andy is going,
Well,
yes,
and here's
very
the deal
cool.
here's what's happening with me. So the things that actually drew me, these were my core things that made me say yes to this whole venture in the first place, were the words care, shelter, refuge. I had a great desire to make that, to be a part of making that. And so as I matured and lived more of my life there, it became harder in many ways because there was a too muchness that happened as the years went by. But also, I really grew to this matters to me. It matters to me, and the details of it matters to me. So I was willing to go a great distance to make meaning through hospitality, through place, through relationships. And I knew that it mattered to me if somebody walked in the door, there were good smells coming from the kitchen, or there was a beautiful garden growing outside.
Those were the values that were embedded in it, that we wanted to be a place that when you arrived, you said, "I think good things are going to happen." And when you left, you said, "I want to come back." So we intentionally tried to make the choices that we knew the way things made us feel. And we knew what it felt like when someone had cared for us. And so we tried to put that into the work. So consequently, everything on the property was, homemade.
Sure.
This is craft before craft,
Yeah.
Artisan before artisan. And yeah, I mean, there wasn't a thing on the property that we didn't dream up and have built for us, or create ourselves.
Yeah.
And
That takes a whole lot of thought and care and
yeah,
energy.
I mean, it was like the ultimate custom home and recording studio and offices and
Compound. The
compound.
ultimate.
And every
Yeah.
time we renovated with calling in mind. So we would make something new, knowing that this is what's happening or this might happen if we did this. And so it was kind of always an organic thing that was.
Yeah.
And you moved away from Art House, right? Was it a slow process that you came out of Art House, or what was the decision to no longer make your home there?
We moved just 4 years ago.
It's pretty recent.
We were there over 2 decades, I think. I think we lived there. Do we decide for 23, 24 years?
Yeah.
And it was so hard for us to move away. It was a really special place, and we had so many amazing experiences there. And also as a family home, it was an amazing thing. We had our grandchildren there, but just as a whole, the weight of it was a heavy weight. Financially, it was a heavy weight. Physically, just to keep it going. But when we finally decided to move, we'd tried to do it the year before. We'd entertained the idea of it. We came downtown one weekend just to spend the night in a hotel and kind of see what it felt like to be able to walk around and be near things and look at houses. And we just, at the end of it, we just said, let's go home.
We just weren't ready.
Let's just go home. But we're not ready. We lived another year. Built some more. Did we build some more stuff?
Probably.
maybe we did that thing with the garden. And then it was finally, and it was really instigated by Chuck to say I need to change.
And I'm going to jump ahead a little bit so we can reflect back, because I
Okay.
want to now talk about The Writer, the Husband, which is your new project.
Uh-huh.
And Charlie, even since we've booked this interview, you started even another project with your art,
Yes.
which is fantastic, and I want to touch on that. But now kind of coming to this The Writer, the Husband
Yeah.
project, what was the impetus for launching this new blog?
So for between 2010 and 2018, we had a component of our art house work that was a literary blog. And we started it together. And then I kind of took it as a labor of love and was editor in chief. And we had an editor, and we had lots of different writers writing for us. But it was also a place where I could write anytime I wanted.
Mm-hmm.
So I think kind of separately from each other, we were thinking about, well, maybe it would be a good time in our life to have a blog. And for me, it was, oh, that'd be great. I would love to do that because I would love to have that ability again to just have a place to write regularly.
I really admire Andy's writing,
Mm.
and I'm very aware of how much it touches people. And I wanted to come alongside her as a partner to build something together that could really um, focus on both our writing, but again, as a husband, for me, a big part of it was wanting to say, "Hey, look at Andy,"
Mm.
and dig what she's doing here.
One of the topics that you both touch on is kind of coming into this new era for your marriage, and in kind of both in your own creative spaces, of slowing down, slowing the pace down. Especially as you talk about Art House being a place that you were always happily hosting, but it was kind of draining you. And so, Charlie, in your recent post, you actually wrote that your central nervous system experienced like a meltdown. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
definitely.
And you actually say that a lifetime of mystery illness kind of pointed to this
Yeah.
underlying problem. What was that like, working with all these people, working with all these musicians, doing your own all these things, and then having these very painful and difficult illnesses?
Well, there were reasons to call the illnesses something else. I mean, there were legitimate. Um, I really did have a burst spleen. I mean, that
Yeah.
wasn't my brain making it up, or any number of things that had happened in terms of illness over the years. But I think the most significant thing about it is that I was always just one small person. And I lived into an idea about myself that I would be the last man standing,
Mm.
and that you. I'm sorry you can't keep up with me. It was a kind of survival by arrogance
Mm.
to sort of say that I have more stamina than anyone. I can stay up later than anyone.
Mm.
I can do twice as much work. Now, I would never say those things out loud, but it was about something that was some sort of sickness that was driving me to think that that's the way I needed to live.
Mhm.
And that's really what led to this episodic illness pattern, over many, many years, because I was really just uh, doing to my body and to my mind and to my family, just what we weren't made for,
Mm.
you know.
Mhm.
And it's not to take away from the achievements or the benefits, of being successful at what you do, but it didn't. It came with a cost,
Sure.
And I think what you hear us saying, maybe in these first couple of blog posts, is that for those who are listening, we want you to know that it came with a cost.
Mm.
And it's important for us to say that out loud so that we can move on from there.
Mhm.
Because now it's not like we aren't busy, because we're super busy
Sure. No.
people.
Yeah.
But there's a difference between busyness and the ability to be busy and then to say, no, I don't have to do that.
Yeah.
And I can quit working now. I
Mhm.
feel tired. For me, that's a very, very new permission
Hmm.
that I've given myself over the last couple of years.
And that comes with stepping back, with rolling back your responsibilities, maybe, and
Well, yeah, I would not be in the place of good health that I'm in today if I had kept riding that train, you
mhm.
know.
You actually talk about a little engine in
Yeah,
one of your first
absolutely.
entries. There's a little engine
Well,
pushing you.
because the mythology of myself was about that I was a person who could get things done and that I didn't quit. Like
Mm.
quit was not in my vocabulary.
Mm.
Now get sick was in my vocabulary,
Mm.
but I would get right back on,
Yeah.
after I got well enough to do it. And it was always that pattern over and over again.
Well, actually, and chronic resilience is another phrase that you've used that
Yes. Yeah.
I adore that phrase.
And can you tell a little bit about why that is?
Yeah, yeah. It's because
links to.
going back to the way we began, when we kind of trauma bonded, as teenagers,
Mm.
and I began to take care of us,
Mm.
very early on, and then Andi doing her part of it as well. But I was a 16-year-old who somehow got it in his head that needed to work full time, right?
Wow. Yeah.
You know,
Mhm.
so I missed a part of my childhood because I was trying to organize life in such a way that we would be safe and good, okay.
Mhm.
And that was that idea of these children behaving like
Like
they're
adults.
adults. I mean, that's why we got married so
It
young.
was
It
you
was
two
like,
against the world.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was up to you to
Yeah.
protect each
Yeah.
other.
Because we did not feel safe. We
Hmm.
didn't feel that we were being cared for at that time.
You do mention, so you've been together, well, you've been together longer than 44 years, but you're coming up on 44 years
Yeah,
of marriage.
47 years
47
together.
years. And the world seems to be completely like dumbfounded by that. How can
Yeah.
people be together that long? But I think it's a beautiful thing and it's a telling thing about wisdom and loyalty. I wonder if you were to sit down with yourselves when you were 18 and 19, what would you say? Would you warn against these things? Or have they made you who you've become and you don't want to take them away? If you could tell yourself something when you're 18 or 19, what would you say?
I would love for them to be taken away, some of them, but they did make us who we are as well.
Someone had asked the President Trump about regrets and him saying that he had no regrets. And I thought that was so humorous because I can't imagine anyone who's lived a full life not having regrets.
Mm.
Um, because all regrets are is a manifestation of your imperfection.
Mm.
And we're all going to make mistakes and perpetrate against others and be perpetrated against. So for me, I would, if I could talk to my teenage self, I would say, no matter what happens, no matter what the circumstances is, no matter how bad it gets, no matter how much you think you need to, you do not need to prove that you deserve to be alive.
Wow. Can you give examples of situations where that was something that you felt like you were proving?
Yeah, I think from a very early age, my relationship with my dad was very performance oriented.
Was he the musician?
Yeah, he was a musician too. And so I got the message pretty early on that if I was going to amount to something, the idea of amounting to something was all about hard work. So that was the message. Like you won't fulfill your destiny if you're not someone who works very hard. In fact, works harder than everyone else. It's just you won't fulfill your destiny. So consciously or subconsciously, a part of me believed that, and it became a compass for me. And of course, that's a journey that's never ending. I mean,
Yeah.
you'll never arrive with that,
Mhm.
because there's just no peace embedded in it. No matter what you achieve, nothing's good enough.
Mm. This subject of peace, what are some ways that the both of you have worked to embed peace? Is this something that over the last several years you've started to focus a little bit more on, and what does that look like?
We have done both separately and together over many years, but in particular, the last few years, we've done a lot of counseling work, and we I think one of the biggest things I would say that helps the peace that we've come to at this stage of life, and I summarize it, but it's good rhythms and boundaries, um, pacing, having a life that's multidimensional rather than one dimensional, where it's all about this one thing all the time, but that it's more well rounded with a playfulness, with cultivating relationships with friends and family, and um, you rest when you need to rest. You listen to your body when it's saying, I can't take anymore. I need to rest it for a time. And like paying attention to all of those things is something that's pretty new season for us, I would say.
Mm. For people who want to live a remarkable life, and that doesn't mean celebrity, that doesn't necessarily mean monetary success, just a life where they can look back and say, that was pretty cool, that was very remarkable. How can we tune our attitudes to live lives full of remarkable standards?
Rather than use the word success, I really like to stay away from that word, and I like to use the word fruitfulness instead. I think it's so much bigger and more dimensional, and also not something we can necessarily get to judge that it's happening or measure, but it's something I think we can pray for and follow what seems like good paths. We can care for people in the ways that we're given to in our own lives and our own circles, and understand that vocation rather than career is a much deeper, richer, bigger word that takes in the whole of an individual person's life. That's the way your gifts and talents are lived out, the way you are called to be a father or a mother or a child or a friend. I think that's a kind of guidelines that make sense to me. I know they're not specific, but you can take those to your specific life.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. The
Mhm.
topic of vocation versus career, I think,
Mhm.
is very profound.
Yeah, and so that's what I think anybody keeps living their vocation for an entire life, and it can change shapes, and you might have the same threads and they might look different, but because it's relational, you've always got that, and you're living that out all the way through. And so there's just so much room for God to keep revealing and unveiling and deepening you, and and deepening the relationships. And
Are there any obvious insecurities that either one of you, together or individually, feel like you're battling all the time? And how have you found ways to effectively work with it?
I don't come into the world with a lot of security, so I have insecurities all over the place. They're about family, they're about did I do a good enough job with my children? Like, did I, because I was so young, we were always young parents. Even I'm getting Easter baskets for the grandchildren. Am I doing it well enough? Will they be happy? Will they be pleased? Will each one be, I have insecurities when I'm asked to speak and I'm preparing to doing the preparation work ahead of time. I have the voices in my head. Why would anybody want to listen to you? What do you have to offer? Those kinds of things. So I bring a lot of that stuff. But I have also really pretty secure trust in God being my peace and calling me to all kinds of different things, and that as I walk towards those things, that He's with me in them. So I'm kind of have all those things wrapped up together, kind of maybe trading off.
Right. How about you, Charlie?
I think I'm going to borrow from Anne Lamott for a minute and just say the only thing I'm certain about is Jesus. And there are so many uncertainties for me in my being and in my person that, come out as insecurities. I do feel very known by God. And so for me, kind of like Andy, anything that I'm wrestling with is at this point in life, it's really what is passing away but hasn't passed yet. And the older you get, you should become more aware of it. You should be able to identify all those things more and more. And so it can feel a little more chronic, even more as you get older. But it's you just really recognizing the full weight of the need for the gospel, the full weight of what you've been forgiven, the full weight of how you're being changed. And so there's that tension. I think if you're getting your 60s and you've had a reasonably good life, hopefully you've matured and you're more mature now than you were then, but there's never a moment when you aren't aware that you have lived the life you've lived. And it has its glories and its shames, and it has its confidences and its insecurities, and all of it is a navigation, isn't it? I mean, it's all about, I think that's why for people like myself I've had a public life for 4 decades, and so I learned how to front and how to make you think that I have it together, and I think the greatest part about this point of being in life together with Andy at this time and under the gaze of God is that I can say for the first time in my life, I do not have it together.
I want to end with a quote that you actually wrote in your blog, and I thought it was beautiful and a fitting way to end. Today we are experiencing a remarkable renaissance in our marriage and creative lives. Each of us able to say, this is what I hoped for, what I longed for. So 44 years later, and that's a beautiful legacy. The Ashworths, Rogues number 20 and 21, are the longest living guests I've had on this podcast. Their perspectives are the most full and rich in this way. The next episode, the final installment of the Rogue Ones, will feature our oldest living rogue. I found it appropriate to arrange the episodes this way as we all look forward to long lives of remarkable living. If you liked this episode, you might like my conversation with the Rabbit Room's Pete Peterson. All episodes are at rogueonespodcast.com. Thanks to Freezer Burn Recording for capturing the audio, and Ryan at Sick Island Studios for editing this episode. Be well, my friends.